Hello, my name's Gavin. This is Genre Books, and just a bit of fun today. 25 writers who you don't think of as science fiction writers and works that they have written, which I think you could make an argument are science fiction. The fun comes in when you realise that at least some of these writers will be very put out to have their works described as science fiction. There's a bit of snobbery about science fiction, certainly when some of these works were written. It's seen as juvenile, and there's various reasons for this. People who have their exposure to science fiction limited to Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, Star Wars, you could possibly make an argument for it. I'm snobby. I'm snobby about romance books. I'm sure there are great romance books. I'm snobby about country and western music. I was a little bit snooty about science fiction for a short while. I think when I was doing my degree, I felt I had to put away the science fiction that I had enjoyed. Fortunately, it didn't last. Some of the names on this list, some of the books on this list will be a surprise to precisely no one. Some of them, when I started digging a little bit, surprised me, so I'm hoping they might surprise some people. But let's go. And some of these I'm going to skip through because everyone will think, yes, obviously. Number 25, P.D. James, Children of Men. Obviously, she's much more famous for her detective novels, Inspector Dalgleish. I think this might be her only science fiction outing. But in a world in the near future, which is in decay and decline because the human race has become sterile, it's discovered that someone is pregnant. Number 24, The Road, Cormac McCarthy. Post-apocalypse counts as science fiction, so in it goes. Number 23, Orlando, Virginia Woolf. And here's where the arguments might start. But I'm claiming it for science fiction. There's time travel of a kind going on here. It's not really explained. I think you're possibly concentrating more on the fact that the main character has changed from male to female to wonder too much about the time travel. But, yeah, that spontaneous gender change, well, certainly back in 1928 was something not many people were thinking about. Number 22, E.M. Forster, The Machine Stops. I think 1926. Very science fiction, this one. Humanity has become infantilized, mollycoddled, cosseted and kept safe in their rooms by the ever-present machine who accedes to their every whim. And as the title suggests, that situation does not continue. Number 21, 1984, George Orwell. Obviously, it's going to be on the list. It's a work that is now his most famous. I'd say it probably edges out Animal Farm. It's a work that he has become most associated with. But when set against the rest of his work, it is striking how different 1984 is. I'm not here to talk about any of these works in particular, and I'm really tempted to just go off on one about 1984 because I love it, but I won't. Another time, maybe. Number 20, Mark Twain and a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Time travel again. And again, the time travel isn't explained, but I don't think the author has to try and explain everything away for it to count as science fiction. And at number 19, the first of a few examples of alternate histories. You'll be glad to know that I've left Newt Gingrich's 15 alternate history novels off of this list, but I have included Robert Harris and Fatherland, which is a book that follows a fairly well-trodden path in counterfactual histories, looking at the subject of what if Germany had won the Second World War. You've obviously got quite a few there. You've got Philip K. Dick, The Man in the High Castle, is probably the most famous, but Philip K. Dick's a science fiction author, so he doesn't qualify for this list. Robert Harris, not known for science fiction. So 6 authors out the way pretty quick, and the ones that were first occurred to me. So I think fairly well known. Less well known is Mona Caird. She's a Victorian and Edwardian writer who, right at the end of her career, at the age of 76, produces her final novel called The Great Wave. And unlike anything else she'd written, this was science fiction. It is a tale of the future, and it is a science fiction which is social criticism about racism and eugenics. Coming out in 1931, probably quite prescient and ignored. Number 17, Salman Rushdie. Booker Prize winner, multiple Booker Prize winner, winner of the Booker of Bookers with Midnight's Children, and known for his magical realism. His first novel, late 70s, Grimus, is science fiction. What's more prestigious than a Booker? Nobel Prize for Literature. And we have next the first of 2 Nobel laureates on the list, Doris Lessing. This isn't a science fiction novel. This is 5 science fiction novels. From 1979 to 1983, 5 novels in the Canopus in Argos series. Number 15, Martin Amis. Perhaps this shouldn't be a surprise. His father, Kingsley Amis, as well as being a successful novelist, was also editor of the occasional science fiction anthology. In his novels, Time's Arrow, I think, would be the first one to spring to mind. But let's not forget, he also wrote the screenplay for Saturn III, a novel with Kirk Douglas, Harvey Keitel and Farrah Fawcett. Number 14, L.P. Hartley and Facial Justice. This is a book I did not know existed, and an author I did not know had written science fiction until I found the book at a bookshop one day. L.P. Hartley is best known for The Go-Between, which is certainly was, years back, a mainstay of school syllabus. But here we have a work which is a post-apocalyptic novel, not dealing with the immediate aftermath of the apocalypse, but the society that arises after it. And it's a society that's decided to banish privilege and envy to the extent that beautiful people have plastic surgery to make themselves plain. Number 13. Is this number 13? I really should have written some numbers down on this list. I can't remember stuff and count backwards. But number 13, let's stick with that. George Bernard Shaw, Back to Methuselah. Again, not a single work, but a series of 5 plays, all interconnected loosely. The first play deals with Adam, Eve, and Lilith, and occurs thousands of years in the past. The last of the 5 plays is in the year 31,900 and something, and is looking back on a time where people didn't live for very long. Now everybody lives for centuries, hence the Methuselah. These plays were written between 1918 and 1920 and deal most obviously with the end of the First World War. And number 12, Rudyard Kipling with The Night Mail, a book which is set in the far future of the year 2000. And number 11, W.E.B. Du Bois. This story, The Comet, which I think it's the 1920s, is, unsurprisingly, as well as being science fiction, also about race. And how mankind's racial prejudices and problems evaporate somewhat in the face of worldwide catastrophe. Hitting the top 10 now, Don DeLillo, Ratner's Star. This is a story about a child, a maths whiz, who is brought in to try and decipher a message that is coming from the stars. Number 9. E.P. Thompson was a historian. He's a Marxist socialist historian, best known for his work The Making of the English Working Class, and who gave us the phrase history from below. In the 1980s, in the twilight of his career, he also wrote a science fiction novel, The Psychaos Papers. And number 8. On this list, we've already had a Nobel Prize winner, we've already had a Booker Prize winner, and now we have a Pulitzer Prize winner. Not a Pulitzer Prize for fiction, but one for journalism. John Sandford was an award-winning journalist, and then became a novelist with a long-running detective series called Prey, and another long-running detective series called about the character Virgil Flowers. Early on in his career, he had written a science fiction novel, Saturn's Run. I put Marge Piercy at 7, although I hesitated because I think these works are fairly well known. But He, She and It and Woman on the Edge of Time. But I put her on the list because if you think of her, I don't think you think science fiction author. These next two authors would desperately like you not to think of them as having written science fiction works. At least that's the impression that is given from some of the comments that they made. I won't judge too much. But Ian McEwan has gone on record saying that this book is not science fiction. Machines Like Us is a story about AI and is told in an alternate 1980s where the outcome of the Falklands War is different. The internet exists in the 80s. There's a lot of alternate history going on. I think he just needs to expand his definition of science fiction and embrace the love. And someone who had his nose even more out of joint at the suggestion that his work might be science fiction, Vladimir Nabokov, Ada, which is ostensibly not very science fiction-y in its story, but it involves 2 planets. I'm sorry, you're science fiction. Number 4, Colleen McCulloch, very well known in the 80s for The Thornbirds, less well known for A Creed for the Third Millennium, hitting the top 3 now, and Robert Graves, translator of the Greek myths and the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, writer of Goodbye to All That, the novelist behind Claudius the God, and a science fiction, 7 Days in New Crete. Again, this is a book I didn't know existed until I found it at a second-hand bookshop. But it takes place in a future society, a future history, which begins on Crete. It is a fairly Luddite society. Most technology has been rejected and they follow a new kind of religion. But that's definitely science fiction. Number 2, and 2 writers for this one, both of which are famous, both of which are not famous for science fiction. Joseph Conrad and Ford Madox Ford. The book is called The Inheritors, and it is a story of Arthur, an unsuccessful English writer, who meets one of a group of people called the Fourth Dimensionists, who are invading, in a very weird way, Earth. They're materialists, they speak in metaphor, they're fascinating to the people who are being invaded. I think it's invasion. They want to inherit the Earth, so they're taking control. And I want to finish with a work which is a collection of essays. I'm going to say essays, but counterfactual histories, alternate histories. Not always by fiction writers. There are historians on this list, there are lawyers on this list, but there are also some fiction writers, and let's just go through the people. This is a book called If It Had Happened Otherwise, edited by J.C. Squire, and has works in it from Harold Nicholson, better known as Mr. Virginia Woolf, who wrote a piece about what would have happened if Lord Byron had become the Greek king. G.K. Chesterton, what if Don John of Austria had married Mary Queen of Scots? Hilaire Belloc writes a piece about some event I'm not quite sure. Someone nearly got hit by a cart who was instrumental in the French Revolution, and as a result the French Revolution never happens, and as a result of that France becomes a vassal state of Great Britain. The Second World War still happens, but it happens whilst fighting the still existent Holy Roman Empire. I think that one possibly goes a bit way out there. And finally, Winston Churchill, who wrote a counterfactual about the American Civil War. What if the South had won? But he wants to be a little bit clever, takes it one stage further, and talks about what if Lee had not won the Battle of Gettysburg. So Lee not winning the Battle of Gettysburg means the South loses the Civil War, even though, I think most people are agreed that General Lee didn't win the Battle of Gettysburg. I think perhaps military historians perhaps argued about this. I'm not an American Civil War expert. I had to have to read the title twice because it's called If Lee Had Not Won the Battle of Gettysburg, and my chain of thought was the car in the Dukes of Hazzard was called the General Lee. Dukes of Hazzard was set in the South. The South didn't win the Civil War. That title doesn't make sense to me. I think it's just Winston Churchill being cute. I cheated a little by shoehorning 6 writers into those last 2 choices. But maybe if you don't like science fiction, or you think you don't like science fiction, you may be a little bit interested to find your way into the genre by reading one of these writers or their science fiction work, if nothing else, to spite Ian McEwan. Nothing against you, Ian. I love your books, but it's science fiction. And what's more, your first two novels were gothics.